Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam.
I'm so glad to see you today. Thank you so much for joining us, Shazia, all the way from Texas. How are you?
Thank you. I'm doing good today. Actually, a little tired today, I'm going to be honest. It's one of those tired days I think we have sometimes, but
Mhm.
otherwise I'm good.
Well, thanks for making it nevertheless. So, Shazia, I saw a social media clip of you telling part of your story. And first of all, I really enjoyed your story. But secondly, I also love the way that you told the story. So I thought I have to have this person here with us on And She Thrives. So if you could begin by sharing with our community who you are and what you do.
Sure. Yeah. My name is Shazia Imam. I'm also known as the life engineer. I was formerly an engineer, much to my dad's disappointment, who wanted me to be a doctor, like every they see dad. But I was formerly an engineer and I moved it actually into life coaching. So I'm a life coach. I have a podcast called Feminine and Fulfilled, and I specifically work with women who may look great on paper and feel successful on the outside in certain ways, but they're looking for that deeper fulfillment. Um, and maybe that next level of success for them, whether that means more love, more money, more fulfillment, um, whatever that means to them, bringing that to life.
That's wonderful. So rewinding back to your prior to your first marriage, you could say,
Hmm.
how did that happen? How did you get into that marriage? And if you could tell us more details about the how long that was, and yeah, let's start there.
Sure, sure. So I got married when I was 23. I had graduated from school, and the next best step in checking off all the boxes was to get married. So I married somebody in the community, a Pakistani man, um, who was a very nice guy and actually one of the most eligible bachelors at the time. So it felt like a really big win. And we were married for almost 11 years, where then our divorce was finalized.
Okay. And if you look back on those 11 years, would you say that it was, in your perspective, of course, a functional, healthy marriage or no?
You know, that is a very interesting question because the bigger question is, what is a functional and healthy marriage? That's the real question, right? What is a functional and healthy marriage? My answer to that now, as a woman in her 40s, is very different than when I was in my early 20s. So at the time, I believed it was a functional and healthy marriage. We were both kind people. We were trying to make our way, with our jobs and buying a home, and we were trying to do all of the right things. Um, yeah, so I would say, sure, it was a functional and healthy marriage. But when I look back now and I understand what a marriage can be, there are things that I see now that could have been different, but at the same time, I just don't think we were meant to be together. And I'm really okay with that too. Like
Hmm.
that just being a chapter in my life. I'm very okay with that being a chapter and not having to judge it per se, but just knowing that that's what I needed in my life to come to where I am today.
Hmm. So then, would you say that there's kind of a spectrum of functionality or dysfunctionality within a marriage?
I do. I mean, that's why I really like this question that you brought up because I think it just asks a much deeper question. Like, what is even functional and healthy are two very different things. A marriage can be functioning and can be completely unhealthy, and a marriage can be healthy actually and look completely dysfunctional, right? Two very strong personalities going head to head all the time, but maybe that's just the way that it works for them and they feel that love and compassion. Or you can have two people, like in the situation of myself, where you're really great people, but you're essentially roommates with each other. So it's functioning, but is that healthy? Is that what marriage is? And for some people, that does work. Actually, they would be okay with that.
Mm.
So it really is a very broad spectrum that we just can't put into one box. It's more, what is it for you? Like, what are you looking for? And I think more importantly, when I think about marriage and relationships, is how can we be better in our own selves for our relationships? I think there's a lot of conversation about how things should look externally, how the man should look, but we don't have enough conversations about, well, what does it mean for you? How are you showing up? What does it mean for you in the world to be in this marriage and in this relationship? We're not having any of those conversations.
Hmm. It just fascinates me because, as you know, historically speaking, marriage was very much like an economic or social arrangement.
Yep.
Whereas now we want someone to meet the majority of our needs, whether it be our need for intimacy, intellectual stimulation, fun, uh, adventure, uh,
Mm-hmm.
all of those, which those was such a non thing before. So I
Mm-hmm.
guess that if one is in a marriage where more of those needs are met, that's truly a blessing. But it's rare. It's very rare. I find in my experience to have someone who fills the majority of those needs.
It's rare,
And
and I think it's too much of an expectation. I think it's too much, actually. There was a great podcast episode. I can't remember the name now, but they talked about the evolution of marriage and exactly what you were saying. I mean, really, marriage used to be an alliance. Like the baker needed to find another baker to run the bakery because they couldn't do it on their own, or it was a social thing, or the alliances between, even when we think about royalty, how do we create alliances between lands? And now we're wanting one person to be our everything. And that is all, that's immediately putting so much pressure onto the marriage. It will never survive, in my opinion. Somebody is going to break under that pressure, and it just doesn't work versus understanding that marriage is two whole people being in companionship and lovers.
mhm, yeah. So let's return to you. Tell us about this first marriage, how it unraveled.
Yeah, so in my first marriage, what really was the piece that unraveled everything was we lost our son, very unexpectedly, and we both dealt with it very, very, very differently. And that was the catalyst for the unraveling of our marriage. Um, in my case, I felt very hopeful in that we could move on, and my husband at the time fell into a depression. And that depression manifested as, what you would call a typical midlife crisis, convertible luxury cars, um, a nice friend at work. I'll just leave it at that. Um, and nothing explicit, but emotional. And that's very unhealthy, by the way. And just really I always have a hard time speaking about this because I do still think he's a very nice man. He just dealt with things differently. So I don't want to paint him in any negative light, but he was no longer committed to the marriage. And so within a year after our son passing away, there was this moment where we had gone to this neighborhood of that we loved. It was a neighborhood that, we wanted to move into. A house came available, and I was so excited, and I thought our life can start again. And when we got in the car, and I said, when are we gonna, what are we gonna put in for the offer? He said, I want a separation. And that was the start of the end. And I recoiled. I remember literally trying to come out of the car, like recoiling out of the door. Like I just wanted to get out because I didn't understand what was happening and what was being said. Because I thought we were moving forward and he was ending everything. And this was in year 6 of our marriage. Um, and so that was the start of the unraveling. I tried my best to really save the marriage to the point where I really I sacrificed all my needs and wants. I pretended I put on airs for years that we were still together. I mean, my parents would come over and he literally wasn't even living in our home. But because nobody's going to go check your closets to confirm if your husband is still around, I was able to live this way for quite some time until the imam found out and then had us move in together again to try to reconcile. Um, and that didn't work, unfortunately, but it was still years. I mean, technically, we did get a divorce and then we got remarried. I mean, it's such a long story, so I won't get into all of it. But the the short story is that that moment in the car was the beginning of the end, and from that day until the end was 5 years of trying so hard to save that marriage.
That's a long time. So
Hmm.
my question is, why did you want to save the marriage?
Well, this goes back to the healthy and functional conversation. I believed that I had to stay married. I come from a Desi background. My parents had stayed together for decades, unhappily in matrimony. That's what I witnessed. And you just stayed in marriage. That is the way that things work. To the point where, there's that hadith that is always quoted that Allah's throne is shakes when there's a divorce. I mean, so nobody wants to be that person. But even more than that, it was the societal expectation of who I was supposed to be. Like this was my persona, right? I'm a married woman. I was fitting the mold of our community. And if I didn't fit that mold, then what was my identity? There's no identity. And especially at that time, this is in 2009. I mean, divorce was absolutely not talked about. And it also was not only was it not talked about, it was looked down upon. Let's be really honest. And so I didn't want to be that quote unquote like pariah in the community. What an extreme word I'm using. But for some people, that's who they become. And who does that really hit? It hits women. It hits women because people always think, well, the guy will just move on, but the woman's going to be left. And so I felt like such a failure. And for me, I was doing something good by staying in the marriage. I was doing something for a cause greater than me. I was doing something for the sake of Allah. I was doing something for the sake of all of our family. I believed like if we got a divorce, I believed his mother would pass away. She was already in frail health. So here I am thinking, I have to save the marriage for her. I have to save the marriage because I have to be a good Muslim. I have to save the marriage so I look good to the community. I have to save the marriage so the nieces and nephews, all his nieces and nephews don't think that they can't find love. I mean, all sorts of things. But ultimately, what is underneath all of that, now that I'm in the coaching world, is that I just actually didn't believe that life could be any better and that I had to relegate myself to this place of martyrdom. I was willing to stay in this loveless relationship forever. I really was. And I would have. I would have. And I'm sad actually to say that today. I'm really sad because, again, I don't want to paint my former husband in a negative tone. He was also hurting because he felt so bad, but he was not in the marriage anymore. So it it was just this thing where I just could not let it go. And I remember too, I was looking desperately for somebody to save me. Not only was I willing to stay in this loveless marriage, but I was wanting somebody to come save me. And I thought the saving was staying married. And this is where when we really start to believe that Allah is actually in control, like in that ultimate surrender, Allah always knew that there was more for me, that there was more beyond this marriage. But I was so stubborn. I always laugh. I was such a stubborn one. And I was like, no, 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 I'm gonna stay. I'm gonna stay in this marriage. And so I just did. I mean, 5 years, 5 years of trying.
It sounds that you were, as you mentioned, more concerned about image, what community would say, and about the whole who am I person without this marriage rather than the attachment to him.
Yes, for sure.
Mhm.
For sure. Yeah.
Okay, so would you like to talk about the moment when it ended? Was soon after that? How things were for you?
Yeah. So I think it also took 5 years because I needed that time to grow. I grew a lot in that time. I went on a self discovery journey and started to know myself and go on a personal growth journey. So that by the time 2014, April of 2014, when the period ended, um, and he walked out the door, I had worried so much about this day, like this day where it would end and how I would not be able to deal with it. And the irony is that on that day, he left with tears in his eyes. And I just closed the door and felt relief, like freedom, like, oh, like it was a sigh of relief because I had been so tense and all these years trying so hard. And then finally it was like, oh, that's done. It was such a sense of freedom. I can't explain it. And I was so shocked by it. I was so shocked.
Well, if I might add, isn't it also because, as you mentioned to me in another conversation, that you really overextended yourself and did absolutely everything you could do to possibly save this marriage and win him over, right? And you had spoken about how you had, I think, read the book Fascinating Womanhood and tried to implement those things. So, in a way, it's almost theatrical, and that can be quite
Mm.
exhausting day in and
Mhm.
day out. Is that not so?
Oh yeah. I mean, it was exhausting. It's exhausting to I had hired a marriage coach. I was reading all the books, Fascinating Womanhood being one of them. And if you haven't read it, it's about how to be the perfect 1950s housewife. Not really going to work for an independent woman like me. I mean, it was pretty obvious that I was trying really hard. Um, but I did. I tried everything. I tried to have so many people talk to him and do the things, but not talk to him because you don't want to push him away. And then you've got to act as if, and, you know, there is one great book I will recommend though. It's called Divorce Busting by Michelle Weiner Davis. I think it's called Divorce Remedy now. That's a fantastic book for anyone who may be listening and going through a divorce, who does want to save their marriage. So I do want to say that was a very, very good book. But I was very exhausted. And so, yeah, it was that, along with really starting to see myself and my self-worth, and seeing and believing that there could be something beyond this marriage. It's like by the time he left, yeah, I mean, I put in my dues for those 5 years. I left feeling very complete and like I did my best. A plus.
Wow. So tell us about that sigh of relief and you could say the 1 or 2 years that followed after that. Because they say that it takes about 2 years to really reach a level of stability post
Mm.
divorce. Do you agree with that? And how were those 2 years for you?
I don't agree with that because I feel that I went through that process while we were in those 5 years. So I got a head start actually. So even though it took a long time, I was able to process in that time and let things go and think about what I do want. So actually, when he left, it was true freedom. I just remembered being like, oh my gosh, I'm free. And I just started having parties at my house, like dessert parties and having my girlfriends come over and really just having a nice time. I didn't have to think anymore like, did I ruin somebody else's life? Like I realized everybody will move forward. It's fine, and I'm going to move forward. That was so important, and so I was, and I was having the time of my life. I So much so that literally people were stopping me on the streets telling me how beautiful I am, which is not normal for me. I've never been the person where somebody will stop me on the street and just be like, "You are so beautiful." But I was radiating. I mean, my energy was emanating out of me. And I traveled so much in that year after. I think I traveled to like over 24 places, and I started seeing how big the world is outside of this like little bubble I put myself in for so long. Because guess what? The whole world doesn't all live in a husband and wife in the Muslim community with 2.5 kids and minivan in the single family home, white picket fence. Most of the world does not live like that, actually. And yet, as a community, we've made that so important. So I actually had a really great time in that next year. And my growth was so exponential. And I remember meeting my former husband, we kept in touch after, and maybe about a year or so later, we saw each other. I think we had to close out a bank account. And we were in the Wells Fargo parking lot. And he said to me, he's like, wow, he's like, you have grown so much since our divorce. He's like, you look really good. And I'm over here like devolving. And you know, I thought, yeah, that is true. I mean, that's, and that's not the story that we think will happen. But I really grew so much. And I actually found love again a year and a half later.
Okay, before we get to that, so
Yeah.
in this growth period, when you think back, was there any like specific incident or something that somebody said to you that was very powerful and impactful that really acted as an impetus in your growth journey? Anything that comes to mind?
The impetus for me was actually a moment with myself. Um, it was in, it was actually, I remember the date exactly. It was in 2013, and I was walking on this path behind my house, the WNOD trail. And I was just going on a walk, and I was thinking about my life, and I was thinking about like what a farce my life was. Again, everyone thinks we're fine. We were the model community. I'm the model couple in the community. And I'm walking, and I just stopped, and I thought to myself, like, how did I get here? How did I get to such a farce of a life? Like, everything looks good on the outside, but it is literally falling apart. And it was in that moment that I said, something has to change. Like, I can't keep going like this. And when I went home that day, I wrote in my journal, I had bought this new journal, and I wrote in this journal my vision. I want a man who loves and respects me. I want to look in the mirror and see who, and love the person I see in the mirror. And I just wrote some things that at the time felt completely foreign. There's no way. Like, I'm in this like loveless marriage. Like, this can't even happen. But I just wrote it. And that night is the night I just said to my husband, I said, you don't have to love me, but you can respect me. And he had gotten really quiet. And he said, I'm not ignoring you. I'm just processing what you said. But I didn't need a response. I didn't actually need him to say anything. I just needed to say that. And that for me was the impetus to say, I am moving on. Like, this is happening. I don't need a response from you. I don't actually need anything from you anymore. I I actually get to respect myself. I'm just realizing now as I'm saying it, I was probably also saying that to myself. Like, I get to have dignity. I get to be with somebody who loves me and cares for me. So, again, that happened during our marriage, right? And I think that's what gave me the head start. I had all of 2013 and then 2014 to like really be in this place. Um, because otherwise, yeah, there wasn't somebody else. I just think Allah sent that into me.
During your divorce process, was your spirituality affected in any way?
Yes, I actually became much more spiritual. I developed a newfound relationship with Allah because before my relationship with Allah was very transactional. If I pray and I'm good and I'm a good person, then good things will happen to me. And I just believed that what I was going through was a punishment for like, being a rebellious teenager. So this is my punishment. And so I have to atone for my sins, which is a very Christian way of thinking. But I believed that. And when I realized that I get to have a vision around the same time, I realized I wasn't even making dua to Allah. I was not making dua. I wasn't leaving it with Allah. I wasn't asking for what I wanted. So, what this actually did is it strengthened my friendship with Allah. And that friendship, it's so beautiful because what I used to do, especially once he was gone, is I would take this mug of tea and I would sit in bed and I would sing to Allah. And I would say, "Oh Allah, you're my friend. I love you." Oh, I'm going to get so emotional. And I really like felt that Allah loved me. I didn't believe that before. I just had the halal haram teachings of Sunday school. And I really believed Allah was my friend and wanted to give me really, really good things. And Allah gave me such good things, like such good things. Um, and I'm grateful for that. Yeah.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing. And then you met the man who is now your husband.
Yeah. So it's really interesting, subhanAllah, because I was doing all this work. And even while I was doing this work, I thought for sure I'm going to die an old maid. I mean, I still believed that. Like, I can do all the work, but I was very good with myself. Um, but about a year after our divorce, I had I had mentioned to Yasmin Al Hadi. I don't know if you know her.
Yes, I do. It was hilarious.
So she's a comedian, but also, does matchmaking. It's had a lot of success. So I just told her, she's a dear friend of mine. I said, I think I'm ready to explore maybe getting married. And I said that to her. And in that same year, I had learned all about like The Secret and manifestation and vision boards. And I'd made a vision board and, I had kind of thrown everything at it. Like I'd learned all this stuff and then I was doing it. Like when I decide to do something, I'm going to do it all the way. So in May, I say this to her, and it's Ramadan time. And I started noticing when I would go to the masjid that men would look at me. Like it was really interesting. Remember, I said people were stopping me on the street. And I'm like, men have never looked at me again. I'm not that it girl. That's not who I am. Um, that's what I believed. Now I'm like, yeah, okay. Okay, maybe I'm that it girl, but alhamdulillah. Um, but it was really interesting. So she did this iftar at her house and she brought some singles and some families. And um, I met a guy there that she asked me about afterwards. And she said, "Hey, do you want to like talk to him?" And I said, "Sure." And she said, "Okay, he's going to reach out to you because, he's interested too." So we were both in a place where we were not looking, either of us, to be married. And I thought going out with him was going to be practice. He was moving to Texas. I was from the DC area and he had a daughter. And I was not interested in being a step parent. Like that was just, I hadn't even gotten it far enough to think about what are my non negotiables, but that one I knew. So I thought it was great practice. And we went out and he was very gentlemanly and he took me to a restaurant and, paid for my dinner. And we had a decent conversation. It was very nice. Then he took me out for dessert. It was nice. And then I called her at the end of the night and I said, "Thank you so much, Yasmin, but I'm not interested." And she was like, "Why not?" And I'm like, "He's too nice." And she's like, "You're stupid. You have to go out with him. You have to go on at least 3 dates with him." And I'm amenable. So I was like, "Okay, fine, I'll do that." And so um, he took me out on a second date and we went miniature golfing. And Yasmin literally drove me to that outing. Okay. Like that's how much I was like, I don't really want to go. And she's like, get in my car. I'm taking you. And that was the moment that both of us could let our guard down some. And oh my gosh, I laughed so much that night. And he was just such a gentleman. He was like picking up, like every time my miniature golf ball went in the hole, he would be the one to pick them up and then go to the next spot. I mean, I was just totally getting like spoiled, right? I just felt like such a queen. And so we ended up having a really great time. And then we sat at a park bench and we just talked for hours and hours until finally Yasmin was like, "Are you safe? Like, are you okay? When should I come get you?" And I was like, "Oh, yeah, come get me." And so that was the start of a beautiful relationship. And alhamdulillah, we did get married, and next year will be our 10-year anniversary.
It's
Subhanallah.
beautiful. Mashallah, congratulations.
Thank you. It's wild to think about. We are almost going to surpass my first marriage, and I can't wait for that moment.
And I love to hear that because we hear so many sad stories that it's beautiful to hear a happy marriage story. So,
Yeah, it is.
and so you said that you were not really interested in being a stepmother. How has that been for you?
Alhamdulillah. I mean, it's complex. Being in a blended family is very complex. But like I mentioned earlier, I mean, Allah just loves me. Okay. So we honestly have the best situation. I believe that's possible for blended families. Um, so my bonus daughter, her name is Nasima. Her mom's name is Sarah. And one thing that all three parents, so my husband, myself, and Sarah, the thing that we all have in common is that we want what's best for Nasima. And that is our joint mission. And that's what we come around, and that's it. So there's no drama. There's no like, you know, there's just no drama. Let me just keep it at that because there can be a lot of drama. And it only takes one adult in a blended family situation to make things very difficult. So, alhamdulillah, that we have three people that all are just good, kind, normal human beings. Alhamdulillah. And, Nasima was very young, actually. She was just turning 3 when we got married. So, my relationship with Nasima is that she sees me as a parent in her life, you know? And she's very respectful, and she just knows daddy's house and mommy's house. Like she's just grown up with it. And I give a lot of credit to her mom because her mom was the one who introduced me very early on as Nasima's other mom. That's how she introduced me. And I think that was very generous of her because she didn't have to say that. That's very kind of her to say. But she really established that early on that we just have a deep mutual respect for each other. Um, and I think I'm a great bonus mom. I know that I'm not her mom and I don't try to be her mom, but I see myself as a loving entity in her life, a loving parent figure. And that Allah put us together for a reason. So some of our children come through our womb, and that is a beautiful gift. And some children come in other ways, and
Mm.
that's a beautiful gift too.
That's a tremendous blessing that all three adults are not hostile towards each other. So that's really amazing. And
Hmm.
then I believe that your husband comes from a different cultural background,
Yep.
ethnicity. And
Yes.
how has that played in your marriage? Because you come from a very Desi background, right?
Yes.
Hmm.
That is a really funny story. So my husband is actually Black. He's African American. He identifies as Black American, and it has been really interesting because when my dad first met him, um, he let me just say the first night my dad met Antonio, he did not love him. Okay, and I had to call my dad out on his racism, and he was like, "You're right." Okay, so I give my dad credit for acknowledging um, you know, not accepting Antonio because of his race. But right after that, he totally did. And the community embraced him, and my family embraced him. Everybody did, actually. That sometimes I forget that we're different because when we go out into the regular world, we're still brown to the general American society. And then I forget, and I just don't think about us as being a mixed couple. I know we are, but like I just don't necessarily think of it. I don't know how to make sense of it. I have a really great video I did with him and podcast episode if maybe you can put that in the show notes.
Hmm.
Um where we dive deeper into it, but overall it's been great. I think what's been really interesting is me understanding my own relationship with racism. I've learned a lot about myself too. I've grown a lot. And also like understanding the assumptions a lot of people make. So he's been Muslim for over 25 years, but the assumption is always that he converted for me. I'm like, thank you for giving me so much credit that I would convert somebody, but that I don't have those powers, right? And there's nothing wrong if somebody does that, but it's interesting the assumptions that people make, or the assumption that they make that Sarah is not Muslim, even though she is Muslim. She was born and raised Muslim. So there's a lot of things that are just interesting. That's why I did like a whole episode about it. But overall, for me, I don't think about it day to day. But then sometimes I am reminded that we are an anomaly in the Muslim community. It is becoming more common, but it is still an anomaly. Um, but I just don't like to highlight it. Maybe that's what it is. I don't like to spotlight it because for me, I feel this connection with Antonio that even though our cultures are different, he is the husband that I'm with in a healthy and functioning relationship. Like I can say with full confidence, we have a healthy and functioning marriage. Um, and so that takes a more of a priority than thinking about our
Mm.
cultural backgrounds.
And that is my next question, is that if you could go into more detail about what makes your marriage healthy and functional.
Mm-hmm. I would be happy to share. I can finally take all those years of reading all those books and share. But life experience has actually been the best teacher. What I love the most, what I feel is the healthiest, is that both of us can be who we are. We both came in, we were both mature when we met each other. And we really did not come in thinking we were completing each other. And I love that Antonio gives me the space to be who I am and to do what I want. He never ever stops me. In fact, he really encourages me. And I'm in a role that's very visible. I mean, if you just find me anywhere, I'm very visibly out there. And I don't know that a lot of traditional Muslim men would allow their wife to do any of, like even a fraction of what I do. But I have a husband who wants me to feel good about who I am, who wants me to be at my biggest and brightest. Because guess what? When I'm like that, I'm an amazing wife. I'm a great wife. Then I can pour love into him because I feel really good. That's very healthy. Versus if I were to be stuffed and trapped and not able to be myself, and then I'm depressed and I'm taking it out and yelling and this and that. I mean, it is beautiful to be in a relationship where you can allow and accept, you can allow your spouse to be who they are and accept them for who they are. And I do the same for him. I am a fabulous wife, by the way. Let me just pat myself on the back.
Oh, do share, please.
Yes. I I did learn a lot from my first marriage. When I went into that marriage, I was young, I was immature, and I was not a great wife. I won't say I was a great wife. No, I wanted things to be a certain way. I wasn't very good at controlling my own emotions because it's okay to have emotions, but it's not okay to ever um, mm, do something to somebody else that's harmful to somebody else because of your emotions. That's not okay. We are adults and we're responsible for our behavior. But I was young and immature. It's okay. But now I'm not young and immature. I'm mature. I read so much in that time in my first marriage that I understood what men want in marriages, what drives them, what makes them tick. So for example, men are innately, generally speaking, driven to provide for their family. And it's just not the same for women. We just don't have that same drive. But understanding that men are this way, instead of trying to think we're the same, understanding that there are things that make men tick. They want to be respected. They have an innate need to provide. They are physically, like they're physical beings. They like physical things. I mean, again, we can pour our expectations of the way we think people should be, or we can accept and then work with that. And so I also learned too, how I could utilize my feminine in a way that was congruent with who I am, but also getting what I want in the relationship too. There's nothing wrong with that. I think, these older aunties kind of knew what they were talking about. And it's okay to use those things. There are actually some things from Fascinating Womanhood that I do use. Not everything, but some things.
Could you give an example?
Yeah. Oh my God. Okay. I'm going to give you, it is such an old school example, but let me tell you something that is always going to make a man want to do something for you. You can use it with any man, it doesn't have to be your husband. You just have to comment on his muscles. That is it. Oh, could I get your muscles to help me with this? Every time. And it is so funny. It is so funny because that is very like I am using a damsel in distress kind of thing to get what I want. But listen, it works. The man's like, yeah, of course. Yeah.
Mhm.
Like, let me do that for you. Let me get that for you. Um, so
I'm laughing because that point is also in The Surrendered Wife by Laura Doyle. Have you read
yes, I
that
read
one?
that too, of course.
And she said you go to a man and you say, "Ooh, I like your muscles" or something. And once I was talking to a guy and I said, "Don't you think that is so cheesy?" And he said, "No, I'd love to hear that. I would love it."
Yeah.
Even though it does sound very like contrived and,
Contrived, yes,
yeah,
it
yeah.
does. And because it's not something I would care, then it sounds like I'm being fake. But the truth is, I can never tire of um, somebody calling me beautiful. Like, it doesn't feel contrived when it's genuine. Like, it's like, thank you. Yes. Like, so understanding that men and women, generally speaking, are different is very powerful, and being able to use those tools. So, a lot of the great books like The Five Love Languages is a great book. Understanding that we speak love differently, understanding that men and women are different. What's that book? Men are from Mars, women are from Venus. Like, these are bestsellers for a reason. They're really good, actually. And understanding those things and pouring into the relationship makes for a healthy relationship. And I think the most important thing, and I'm going to give so much credit to both of us for this, is continuing to renew your commitment to the marriage. So everyone's going to fight, and there's going to be nasty fights in all marriages. Like, if anyone tries to tell you there's not, no, that's not true. You're going to have things that you fight about. You're going to have seasons that are tough and that are heavy. And we have definitely had those, Antonio and I. But the consistent theme is we always come back to each other. We're still committed to the marriage. And even when the talk of separation has come up, we still have come back. And that's really powerful. That is so powerful. And I will say, we do have a marriage coach we work with in those times, and she helps to bring us back towards each other. But even being willing to do that is being committed to the marriage and saying, okay, yes, I love this person. And and I'm grateful for that, because again, it only takes one person in a relationship to end it. It can just take one person. So yeah,
Yeah, it
alhamdulillah.
sounds as if you both have a common strategy and philosophy towards marriage. So even
Yeah,
if things are pretty crappy, well, we're going to get back on track, you know.
yes. And, I've had to learn to accept a lot of things and let things go. I mean, football season is on right now, so I do not see my husband Sunday, Monday, Thursday, and now Friday. And he does fantasy football. So basically all day.
Oh gosh.
Outside of work, he's also works like 6 days a week. So it's like, but we still get to have quality time together. But I've learned to accept that. That used to be a real sticking point for me in the beginning. I was so upset and like, why are you doing this? But he loves it. He loves football. How can I take that away from him? So finding our balance, finding what works in the marriage. But I find that marriage is so much about acceptance, so much.
Shazia, what would you say to women out there or even men who are struggling through their marriage? And, this is always, I always feel some discomfort when I ask this kind of a question because there are people out there who really should see it through. And there are other people out there who actually should separate. And
Hmm.
it's hard from the outside to make that kind of distinction because marriages are so complex. What would you say to that person who just thinks, well, there is no future here?
Well, I'm so aligned with what you just said, right? That's what I see too, right? That there are some marriages that, oh, you're like, they could have made it. Like, come on. And then others were like, oh yeah, we saw that coming. But I will say, from my perspective, I do believe that more marriages could have worked than the marriages that should have ended. This is my personal opinion. And this is also, I mentioned that book, Divorce Remedy by Michelle Weiner Davis, and she actually speaks about that. And I really align with that, that marriages can work, all marriages, unless there's abuse. Let me just put that disclaimer. If there is abuse, like that is an absolute red line. So if anyone is in an abusive situation, you absolutely get to leave that. For everybody else, my advice is this. I keep talking about it just takes one adult, right? It also only takes one adult. It also just takes one person to change to make the marriage work. And I know somebody might push back on me on this, and they have to me. And this is what I say. You get to be that one person. So what I'm saying, it takes one person. Don't go to your spouse and be like, you need to change, because that's what everybody's saying, right? We're going like that. This is what we see. Well, he needs to change and she needs to do this. And it's a lot of finger pointing. And what's that saying? Like when you point your finger, the other finger's pointing back at you. Yeah,
Mm.
actually, I don't like that saying. It just feels like very like country western, but but the point of it is so important. So if you take the time to look inwards and change yourself, whether your marriage survives or not is actually no longer the goal that we're looking at. You will always be better from working on yourself. You will always benefit from doing that personal growth. That's what's beautiful about being the person who says, I'm willing to look at myself in the mirror and I'm willing to take responsibility for things and I'm willing to be open to change.
I do want to say something though. That sounds nice in theory. It
Mm-hmm,
makes sense.
mm-hmm,
The thing though is that you know that when you are in a marriage where like the vibes are not cool,
mm-hmm,
okay, so that is very stressful. It's very stressful and it's a complete mood killer. Like how can a woman or a man for that matter,
mm-hmm,
say, I'm going to do this and work on myself and fulfill my own needs and,
mm-hmm.
solve all my trauma and all of that. When there's this other presence in the house that's like a shadow that's constantly there, that is actually, it's sad. It's sad or it's stressful,
Mm-hmm.
So how does one do that?
Okay, well, first of all, what I'm sharing is not theoretical. I want to be really clear about that. Literally, I am the data of doing that. So I'm going to just put that out there. What I'm speaking about is not theory. Like, this is what I lived. And this, what you're asking, look, we can look at our lives. This applies even outside of marriage, okay? We can look at our lives and we can feel like things would be different if XYZ was different. We say this to ourselves all the time. If I had more money, if I had a spouse who was like this, if, I, my kids weren't like eating at my head, my life could look a certain way, right? Fill in the blank. We're talking about marriage. So I'm going to talk about the spouse who maybe he's like this shadow in your life, okay? Your life will not change. It will not change unless something changes, okay? So if we're waiting for this shadow of a person to change, guess what? It's only going to get worse. It's only going to get worse. If you want a change in your life, changing at the internal level will always bear fruit. But remember, I said it doesn't necessarily mean that the marriage will work, but the benefit will always be to you, because if you want your life to look different, there has to be a shift. Because unless you want your life to look the same day after day after day, something has to change.
Yes, I agree with you. I agree with you in principle, but I guess what I'm saying is that, say, for example, there was nobody around and you were alone.
Yeah.
That then you can look in the mirror and be like, okay, I'm gonna get with the program and start changing. But if
Mhm.
there's a constant stimulus, there's a stimulus in your presence all the
Mhm.
time. Like you've got to sit down and have a meal with this person. You've got to see them in the morning. You've got to have them, and then there's this all this other tension that's happening. That, in my opinion, I would envision that it would actually act as an obstacle to be able to let there be openness for that change to
Mm.
happen because of this constant stimulus, because you can't remove yourself from that situation. And I find that this is where people
Yeah.
get stuck. It's like they're like, I want to be better, I want to work on myself, but I'm constantly faced with this person. And sometimes and that can be different kinds of negativity. It could be passive aggression, it could be
Mhm.
stonewalling, or it could be somebody who's
Mhm.
actually like condescending, verbally abusive. I mean, because
Mhm.
there are an array of possibilities of how that dysfunctionality looks like.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, but I have to just be honest. I don't agree that there's still no, even in that position. That's the thing, is that people get stuck in exactly what you're saying, and and I have nothing else to offer except exactly what I'm still saying. So if somebody believes that in theory, then make it a reality. Even if it's as simple as, I can't eat a meal with this person anymore, and that's the change I'm going to make.
Mm.
I am now going to choose to not eat a meal with this person. And unless that person is abusive and controlling and saying, you have to eat with me, that's a change you could make. And then somebody could say, well, I want to eat with the family all together. Okay, great. You can lead the conversation in a different way. Like, let's take our agency back. When we're in that conversation of like, oh, but this person or this thing or this entity is here, and that's why I can't flourish, you've given your power away. We have the capacity at a minimum, even to change our duas. Like, even that, it doesn't matter what situation you're in. You can magnify your duas. You can change the thought patterns in your mind. You can change the words coming out of your mouth. These are all things that are completely independent of anybody else. So that is the place, like, I really want to land this, because I feel in our community, we get so stuck in feeling like that, we get stuck like feeling like victims. And I'm in no way victim shaming, or I don't feel sympathy for people in very difficult situations. But we're talking about what advice in relationships. This advice is great if you're in a healthy marriage. It's great if you're in an unhealthy marriage. Being able to look at yourself and make a shift, and not just be caught up in the same narrative over and over again. Like I said, it will bear fruit, and maybe the marriage won't last. Maybe that shadow is so much that you do leave, and it's not easy. Divorce is not easy, but maybe that's what does happen. And you breathe that sigh of relief, like I did. I couldn't imagine being divorced, but I wouldn't change anything. I have so much respect of myself. I am so proud of who I was in it. And I left, and that's why things moved for me more quickly. I'm going to be really honest about something, and I apologize right now if this is offensive, but there are too many women who get stuck in how bad their situation was. And then they have people around them who are sounding boards who say, yes, that was so bad. And he was an a hole and this and that. And you know what's happening? These women get stuck in this negative place, and their life doesn't move on. And they're the ones crying in their bed at night because they're alone. And we should be able to, like, what I'm saying right now, like, I want a woman to hear this and her life to change because she decided to change this narrative. Like, we need to move out of this, and we need to elevate each other and give the beautiful, like, power of our own being, that let's not be like the froth of the ocean. Let's be the powerful beings that Allah chose to give a human, to give the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam the Quran. The mountain trembled and said, I will not take it. And Allah gave it to humans. That is the magnitude of the power that we hold. So let's not get caught up in a story that our life is a certain way because of something else. Like, take that power back. Okay, I'm done.
100%. And I think that for people who can't do it on their own, that's why it's important to have good suhbah, good friendships, or having a
Yes.
coach, somebody who can motivate you, inspire you, and in a way show you glimpses of your best self.
Yes. Yes. So that no longer are glimpses, but become who you see in the mirror every day.
Mhm.
Yeah. Mm.
Thank you, Shazia. It's
You're welcome.
been wonderful. I admire your strength, resilience, and optimism, truly.
Thank you. That's a gift from Allah. That optimism is from Allah because I could have had a very different path if I allowed it.
Inshallah, I wish you and your family all the best.
Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam.